go. My name is Lawrence Rosenberg, and this is the Alpha Human Podcast. Our guest today is Rich Diviney, a Navy SEAL commander who served over 20 years in the teams and deployed overseas 13 times, of which 11 were to Iraq and Afghanistan. He was also the officer in charge of training for a specialized command where he spearheaded the creation of a directorate that fused physical, mental, and emotional disciplines. He led a team that designed the first ever mind gym, and that helped special operators train their brains to perform faster, longer, and better in all environments, especially high stress ones. Since retiring from the Navy, Rich has worked as a speaker and consultant with the Chapman Co. Leadership Institute and Simon Sinek, Inc. Rich is also the author of a new book due for release on January 26th, so coming up, and it's entitled The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much. What a great time to have you. It's a weird time, of course. I mean, we're in the holiday season. COVID is making a bit of a resurgence, and people are still kind of figuring out, what's going on out there, the world, the political upheaval, the health upheaval, all kinds of challenges. 2020, people are, wringing their hands about how this is the worst year they've ever experienced. What a time for you to release a book called The 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance, because if we ever needed such a thing, it's now.
It's amazing. It's amazing how timing works out. You don't even plan for it. Obviously, the idea of the book and the process of the book began before the kind of the mess of 2020 hit. But it's interesting, and how apropos it is. One of the things I talk about in the book is optimal performance, and it's this difference. I've always been interested in optimal performance as opposed to peak performance. Peak performance is this thing that so many people are chasing all the time. Right. Business executives, teams, things like that. How can we perform at our peak? And oftentimes they looked at the SEALs as they do athletes for advice on peak performance. And I kept on telling people, hey, SEALs aren't peak performers. We're actually optimal performers, because peak is an apex from which we can only come down. Peak has to be planned for, prepared for, scheduled, right? And trained for, right? The pro athlete, the pro football player, for example, can spend his entire week, and does spend his entire week, planning to peak for 3 hours on Sunday. Any one of us can plan to peak for the hour or two we're giving a presentation or doing a podcast, right? But real life actually requires optimal performance. Optimal performance is, how can I do the very best I can with what I have in the moment, whatever the best might look like, right? So sometimes the best looks like peak. It looks like flow states and everything's kind of clicking, right? Sometimes your best is, hey, you're head down and you're stepping forward inch by inch, right? It's muddy, it's gritty, it's grimy, it's dirty, it's uncertain, it's scary, but you're just moving forward, right? So that also is optimal performance. That's the best you can do in the moment. And man, 2020 was such a year for us to have to perform optimally, because none of us, I would say, felt like we were at our peak, right? We were all here now because we performed optimally. And I think this book and the attributes talk more about that, which is really more near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, that's a great distinction, which clearly is lost in the milieu of all the great phraseology and these ideas like peak performer, peak performance, peak human performance. All these things, we're so focused on hitting the zenith that we forget that. And so what's the rest of the time? Are we just crap? And then right. Then it's that one time during the big game we make the big catch, and so it's so appealing to know that actually, wait a second, peak performance. If we become optimal performers, those peaks will happen because we're optimal performers. It's brilliant. So and I'll tell you what, I can't wait to talk about the book. We'll do that shortly, but I want to kick off really with what inspired you to become a special operator, to join the Navy SEALs, and how I'd love to hear about that journey and how you ended up in charge of training for like one of the premier special operation units in the world, right?
Yeah.
So how does that all happen? Tell us your journey.
Well, it's an interesting one. I mean, actually, it's interesting because it's not so interesting. I grew up in Connecticut. I was an average kid.
Okay.
I have a twin brother, and my twin brother and I loved flying. My dad was a private pilot, so we used to go flying with him all the time. So we wanted to be Navy pilots since the time we were probably 6, 7 years old. And there was nothing really I don't know, dramatic about my upbringing. It was a really nice upbringing in a nice neighborhood with a nice school and a nice family. I was an average kid. I was an average student. I was an average athlete. Uh, and I had read about the Spec Ops teams in an article I saw after the first Gulf War. So in like 1990 or so,
Okay.
Newsweek came out with this article, and it was called Secret Warriors, and there was a picture of a guy with a perfectly camouflaged face on it, and I was like, oh, cool. So I opened up this article, and it was about, I don't know, the normal 8 to 10 page article, and it kind of outlined all the different Spec Ops units. So you had the Air Force CCTs and PJs, the Green Berets,
Hmm.
the Rangers, and of course the Navy SEALs. And what I noticed was that the article was peppered with pictures, probably 20, 25 pictures or so of all these different spec ops guys in different environments. So you had a guy
Okay.
in parachute gear, in underwater, jungle, winter, snow conditions. And out of the 25 pictures, like 20 of them were Navy SEALs,
Right.
and they were SEALs in all these different environments. I was like, man, all these guys, they do everything. They're everywhere, right? And so I said that's really fascinating to me. And so I especially was drawn to their kind of proclivity in the water because I was a water rat. I grew up on the coastline in Connecticut, so
Okay.
I loved being in the water. And the fact that these guys made the water, the ocean, which is so, I mean, it's very hostile to humans, right? I mean, there's bone crushing temperatures, bone crushing
Mhm.
pressures. It will humble the best, strongest human being. The fact that these guys made this place their home, right? This kind of really hostile environment, their safe haven, was kind of audacious and attractive to me. And so I said, you know what, I think I'm going to try this. And I never wanted, ultimately, I said to myself, I never wanted to be a pilot and look over at a SEAL platoon and wonder if I could do it. So I made my decision. I said, okay, I'm going to try this. I was fortunate enough to get selected for SEAL training. Um, and I had up to that point been really interested in and had on a couple of occasions put myself in positions of people who were better than me. When I played sports in high school, I wasn't that good of an athlete, but I kind of just I was with athletes who were pretty good, and so it brought up my athleticism and it challenged me in ways. And this is how I felt when I got to SEAL training. And I went through, you go through SEAL training, you go through something like that, and you kind of don't think about it at the time because you start with, I don't know, my class back 20 plus years ago was 165 or something we started with, and we graduated 38. Right, those are normal numbers.
Right.
And I remember I graduated and I looked around at these people, these guys who I graduated with, who are now all my teammates and brothers. And I said, man, these guys are so much better than me. I mean, they're just awesome. I mean, I just felt so humbled to be around them. And then I got to a team and felt the same thing. And then I can continue to advance my career and got to different commands, and felt the same thing. And what was interesting is as these brothers and teammates, as I hung out with them more and more and got to know them, of course, as friends and brothers and teammates, I realized they felt the same thing. They felt like everybody around them was better. And what it dawned on me that we were just a collection of dudes who always wanted to challenge ourselves by trying to put ourselves in positions of teams and people that they
Mm.
felt were better than them, that they felt up their game, right? And that's what drove me in, and that's what helped me stay in, and then that's what helped me kind of walk the career path I did. And I mean, all these assignments that you get there, you're oftentimes fortunate enough to get these assignments, and I was fortunate enough, and ended up in charge of training for one of the specialized commands, which
Mhm.
allowed me to really, just because of the nature of the job, dive into, hey, why is it that guys make it through, and why is it that guys don't make it through? What are those things? And at first, it was in the context of selection assessment for this specific unit. And then as I thought about it more and more, and it kind of marinated in my brain, and I moved towards retirement, because that was 10 plus years ago that I was in charge of that, and then I retired 4 years ago, and And I got in front of these businesses, and these businesses would often come to me and say, hey, we're putting together these teams and we're getting the best people, best salespeople, best graphic designers, best whatever. But a lot of times, when uncertainty hits us, when strife hits us, the teams fall apart. We're toxic, so we're getting dream teams that are falling apart. And it was really almost intuitive. I said, well, it's because you're selecting based on the wrong things. You're selecting based on skills versus attributes, which is really the impetus of the idea of the book.
This is this is really amazing, and it should be. I'm not sure how much of the general public understands this, but I mean, it really should be broadcast um, more often, especially with respect to the marketing of the brand when it comes to special operators and what it takes to become, for instance, a Navy SEAL, because everyone assumes the wrong thing. You know, everyone assumes that you've got to be this peak, the alpha human, right?
Right.
What they don't understand is that, it's actually it's the things we don't see that makes you the alpha, that makes you the optimal performer, that makes you capable of becoming a special operator.
Yep.
And we don't even understand it. And you wonder why all these people that you would assume, because I've heard it over and over again from special operators telling me their stories, saying that, this guy should have made it. He was a star athlete. He was, the guy was able to bench press 450. He could run, the mile in, 6.5 minutes. Just incredible. Yet, ring the bell. They're out. They're out.
Yeah.
They're out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't, and you start to figure out, wait a second, why is this guy different? Why is Rich different? Because everyone thinks like you that, hey, I was just average, but actually it's the attributes that make you not average. In fact, most people aren't average. Everyone is a unique mix, as you point out, of these different attributes, and there are certain ones that, if you have them, going to make you a great special operator. By the same token, there's others that'll make you a superstar graphic designer or a top achieving salesperson.
Right.
And this is the brilliance of your book, which, by the way, I had the honor of getting an advanced copy and being able to read. I've read it. I've delved deep through it, studied it. It's brilliant. It's a great book. I can't wait for everyone to get their hands on it. January 26th, I think you mentioned is the day. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct. Yeah, thank you for that. It means a lot that it does resonate. So
it resonates. I think it will resonate with anyone that wants to achieve.
Yeah.
With anyone that does want to do something above average, whether or not they consider themselves above average.
Right.
And so let's dive in to the attributes, right? Because you mentioned where you kind of got the idea to start figuring out what was going on here with the selection process. So in 2010, you had a huge dilemma. You were in charge of training, as you mentioned, for a premier special operations unit. In fact, what's considered maybe one of the best in the world when it comes to special ops teams. And what you did is you selected candidates from other special operations teams. I mean, like the best of. So you were bringing in the best of the best.
Right.
Guys who had already proven themselves to be exceptionally skilled and committed, but crazily, you still had a 50% attrition rate.
Right.
And you couldn't effectively explain why they were not making it and why others were. And so in attempting to better understand why you had that attrition rate, you tell the story of Rear Admiral Draper Kaufman. In the book, you talk about how Draper Kaufman, during World War II, organized the first U.S. Navy demolition teams, which later gave rise to the SEALs. So I'm going to quote you here.
Yeah.
I want to quote you here, and I want to ask you a question. The success of D-Day, the largest seaborne invasion in human history, would need to be preceded by a small group of infiltrators, relying on a handful of volunteers, risking their lives to gather intelligence and clear a path. Draper Kaufman, who at the time was a Navy lieutenant commander, was appointed to organize this new unit. Kaufman understood, though, that being a strong swimmer who could sneak across a beach wasn't enough for his recruits. He needed men who could think on their feet, men who could adopt and flex as fast as the environment did, men who had the ability to be aware of multiple aspects of their surroundings, could work together as a team and learn new things quickly and do so while under unfathomable stress. Kaufman realized, in other words, that he wasn't looking for recruits who knew how to do the job, but rather men who could do the job. The difference in that single word between how and could is enormous. Rich, explain that.
Yeah.
That difference between guys that could do the job versus knowing how to do the job. Talk about what that single word means, what the difference is.
Sure, and I'll put a little personal spin on it, right? I mean, I went through SEAL training 20 years ago. SEAL training has not changed much. In fact, I think it's gotten better.
Okay.
In SEAL training, every candidate, to include myself, spends hundreds of hours running around with big boats on their heads. These boats are hundreds of pounds. You run around everywhere with them on your heads. You also spend hundreds of hours exercising with telephone poles, which are about 300 pounds, and you're doing sit-ups and push-ups and running around with those things on your shoulders. So hundreds of hours running around with boats on your heads and telephone poles on your shoulders. I have also over my 20-year career, I completed hundreds of combat missions overseas and several hundreds, if not tens of, if not thousands of training evolutions. Never on one of those did I ever carry a boat on my head or carry a telephone pole on my shoulder, right? So the idea is that the act of carrying a telephone pole on our shoulders and carrying boats on our head wasn't training us for this. It wasn't giving us the skills on how to be a Navy SEAL. They were drawing up attributes to see if we had what it took when we reached zero. And so Kaufman's kind of unconscious genius, when he first put together his first the NCDUs, Naval Combat Demolition Teams, then became the UDT, then became the Navy SEALs, was that he didn't have a lot of time to do it, and he needed men who could operate when things went south. Of course, he could train people to swim across the beach. He could train people to lay demolition. He could train all the requisite skills. In fact, a lot of the guys he had the requisite skills, but he even needed more than that. He didn't know if they could actually do it. So he said to himself, well, I'm going to design the very first week of training, and it's going to be a week long, 5 days of just nonstop stuff, physical activity, tests, and problem solving, things like that, just stress, grenade simulations, all that stuff. I'm going to give the guys during this week about 2 hours or 3 hours of sleep for the entire week. That's it, right? And I'm going to run this for 5 days, and I'm going to just see who I end up with. And that first hell week, I think over 90% of the guys quit, right? But he knew after that week that the small group he had was the group he knew wouldn't deteriorate when things went south. They showed the attributes. So Hell Week still is the coup de grace of SEAL training. It's the 5th week instead of the 1st now. And all of us, every Trident wearer, has that distinction. We've all been through Hell Week. That's kind of, we all know. If you haven't been through Hell Week, you're not a Navy SEAL. So really what it comes down to is, and what I had to basically do when I was running this training, this assessment and selection for this other command, was I went back to the basics and I said, hey, I think we are unable to articulate why guys are not making it through because we're trying to explain it from a skills-based perspective. What we're saying is like, hey, this guy didn't make it because he couldn't shoot the way we want him to shoot, or he couldn't do this clearance problem the way we wanted to do the clearance problem. But it was insufficient in that every guy who was there, who was showing up, had done that hundreds of times. So we'd say that, and the natural answer from the leadership, well, why couldn't he do it? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. If this guy's a rock star
Right.
and coming to you as a rock star, why couldn't he do it? And so I realized we needed to explain failure and success through the attributes. And so really what I think I need to do is I need to level a bubble and kind of explain the difference for the audience. Okay. The difference between skills and attributes. Okay. Skills are not inherent to our nature. Okay. No one is born with the ability to throw a ball, ride a bike, or shoot a gun. Okay. Those are things we learn. Those are things we can be taught. Okay. Skills also direct our behavior in known situations, right? Here's how to ride a bike, here's how to drive a car or throw a ball, and here's how to shoot a gun. Okay, so they tell us what to do in known situations, and we apply a skill in a known situation. Therefore, they are very easy to assess, measure, and test. We can see how well someone does any of those things, and we can measure it, and we can test it, and we have codified results. This is exactly why most dream teams, whether you're military, whether you're business, whether you're anywhere, get seduced by skills-based assessments. They say, hey, I'm going to get the best graphics designer, I'm going to get the best salesperson, I get, best graduates, right? Best physical qualifications. I mean, doing a lot of push-ups is great, but it doesn't really tell us a lot other than the guy knows how to train to do a lot of push-ups, right?
Right.
So we often get seduced by these visual cues that are skills. Attributes are different. Attributes are inherent to our nature. We're born with them, right? These innate qualities such as patience, adaptability, resilience, we're actually born with them. We can see these, we can see levels of these in small children, okay? We can see levels of patience and adaptability and resilience in small children. Certainly they develop over time, and over the course of our lives, we get better and better at the ones we have more of, but they're more innate, okay? They inform our behavior rather than they dictate, right? So in other words, my level of resilience, or a child, say a 5 or 6 year old's level of resilience and perseverance and adaptability will inform the way that child learns how to ride a bike when that child falls off the bike 12 times or a dozen times while trying to do it, right? So they inform how we show up to situations. And therefore, because they're running in the background, because they're hidden, they're very hard to assess, measure, and test. We can't see them. The times that we see them the most and the most visibly and viscerally are in times of challenge, stress, and uncertainty. Because in an uncertain environment, when we can't make sense of the world, we can't apply necessarily a known skill. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill to an unknown environment. Okay, what we need to do, what we're forced to do in uncertainty and challenge and stress, is lean on our attributes so that we might figure the situation out. Right? We lean on our patience, adaptability. So, an example that's near and dear to all of our hearts is 2020. Okay,
Right.
And COVID-19, when all of us were thrown into a quarantine situation overnight, okay, back in March or whenever that happened for all of us. Very few, if any of us, had the skills that we could immediately apply to the situation. All right. All of us leaned on patience, adaptability, resilience, open-mindedness, situation awareness, because we said, okay, what's going on here? It was an unknown, uncertain, challenging situation that we had to figure out. And so, in fact, throughout the time frame, throughout 2020, as 2020 progressed, we have all actually exercised a lot of our attributes because we've been figuring this thing out as we've been moving on. So challenge, stress, and uncertainty bring these attributes to the fore. This is exactly why SEAL training, whether it be basic training or the training I happen to be running, it was a perfect laboratory inside of which I could see this stuff, because that is SEAL training by its very nature, by its very definition, is throwing someone into uncertainty, challenge, and stress. That's what we do, And so as soon as we began to shift that optic and we decided, okay, which attributes are we looking for? Let's see if we can let's look for those in the same training evolutions that we've always been running. Now we could say, oh wait a second, this guy didn't make it through. It wasn't because he was a bad shot. It was because he wasn't able to task switch properly, or he wasn't able to be resilient enough, or he wasn't able to adapt the way we need him to adapt. And so that's how it really came to fruition, at least the initial idea. And then as I got out of the military and realized, wait a second, this is more than just SEALs, right? This is everybody. We all run on these things, and it can inform all of our behavior. And so the book was written really with the idea of how do all of us look at our attributes under the vein of how to perform optimally, how to do the best we can in any environment.
Yeah, just incredible, because the laboratory that you are operating in to uncover this missing this missing pattern that you weren't looking. And it's funny. It's almost as if it was right in front of you all this time.
Yeah.
In fact, for you to come, it reminded me while I'm reading the book, I'm thinking to myself, this intersects somewhere else with another book I read. And it was a book called Stealing Fire by Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel, about the science of flow states.
Mm-hmm.
And I interviewed Stephen Kotler for the Alpha Human podcast. And his book, it digs deep into how and why certain humans have the ability to access an altered state of consciousness called, or what he calls, ecstasis.
Yes.
That state that allows humans to perform at the peak of their abilities, as if by instinct.
Right.
And he devotes part of the book to how the Navy SEALs are able to tap into flow states, and the high cost of screening for those that can flip the switch, so to speak, and for those that can get into the zone, the screening and the cost of training for that. And I want to quote him from the book. He says that during the debrief, we found ourselves sitting in a windowless conference room talking to Navy SEAL team leaders about the high cost of screening for ecstasis.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that the issue wasn't just financial, the $500,000 that it took to train a Navy SEAL, and the millions it takes for those premier special ops teams like the ones you were running. He says that what concerned you guys more was the human cost. Again and again, he says that we heard how emotionally devastating their screening process can be, how failure ruins careers and lives. And the interesting thing, Rich, is that the meeting he discusses in the book is actually with you.
That's right.
I knew there was something going on here when I was reading this. So I look back, and it turns out that he doesn't reveal your name in his book. He refers to you by a nom de plume, but he talks. You had obviously read Kotler's previous book, The Rise of Superman, while you were in the teams.
Yep.
And you invited him apparently to explore this concept of flow states and to get his insights on how to flip that switch.
Yes.
So when you had Kotler there, he kind of describes how far down the path to not just screening for those individuals that could access flow states that your team was. How you guys were far down the path, but also how you were training for it. So we knew you knew how to screen for it, but also you were training these guys to access those flow states. Can you describe how and where this intersects with your exploration and discovery or identification of the attributes, the attributes of optimal performance?
Well, and it's a great synergy, and it's really wonderful you picked up on it, because it's true. And what I talked to Stephen and Jamie about really initially was this idea that we were interested in flow states because we actually wanted to access them more. Okay, we were always optimal performers. In other words, we'd always perform the best we could in no matter what situation we were in. And the example that's given in the book and the mission that I gave him the unclassified version of was actually, I had to really draw on my data banks to find that in my memory, because most missions aren't very flowy. I mean, that because something always goes wrong. I mean, it's kind of that old saying, no contact or no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy, right? You're always going to have to adapt. You're always going to adjust. In this one, we actually were, but it just seemed like we were kind of moving like this flock of birds, which we trained to do both through physical training, but also these attributes. These attributes, so these attributes, if you have the proper mesh of attributes and skills on a team, what you get is this thing that I call dynamic subordination. And I know Stephen and Jamie talk about it in the book because it's something that I kind of told them about and kind of described to them in our process, right? Dynamic subordination basically throws the whole normal task organization on its, it kind of throws it out the window, right? The pyramid that we think of, the hierarchical pyramid that the military people think of in the military, that doesn't happen in a SEAL team or a team that's very, very high performing. Neither does the flat line, neither does the upside down pyramid, which is really very philosophical. And the leader's like, hey, I work for you and I care for you, which is good. I'm certainly not bashing it. I would actually encourage it. But in a high performing team, things happen much more dynamically and much more seamlessly. And so dynamic subordination is this idea that in a team, in a high performing team, such as the SEAL team, problems, challenges, or stress, whatever that is, whatever form it is, can come from any direction at any moment at any time. And when it does, the person who is the closest to the problem and most competent or capable steps up and takes lead immediately, right? And then everybody else follows. And it's a dynamic swap between leader and follower relationship. So wherever the problem is, it's like a flock of birds, right? Suddenly we're going this way, we're following this guy. The sniper's leading us out. We got him. Suddenly maybe it's the breacher guy, or it's the next assaulter, or maybe it's the OIC. Who knows? But the environment changes, and the environment dictates who steps up and takes lead, and then whoever does, everybody follows, right? So it's interesting because I also call it alpha hopping, right? People think there's an alpha in every team, every unit, that,
Right.
you know, the kind of the leader, right? Well, in high performing teams, the alpha has to hop, right? Because no one person can always be in charge all the time, right? I mean, you have to defer, you have to default. And I would even say this, just think of a great marriage. And I use my own. I mean, my wife and I've been married for 20 years, and we've we've achieved this ability to kind of lean on each other when we need to. And you think about, you know, this idea. A lot of people say, "Oh, who wears the pants in the family?" All that. I don't like that. I don't like that phrase, because for me, that phrase doesn't indicate a high performing marriage, right, or a high performing team. And I don't want to certainly don't want to comment on marriage, right? But a high performing team in a marriage. My wife and I, sometimes she steps up and takes leads, and I follow, because she's the person who knows exactly what to do in the moment, and I am following her. And then other times, I'm the person who knows how to, you know, knows what to do in the moment, and I step up and take lead, and she follows, right? So that's alpha hopping, you know, and the alpha in a high performing team needs to hop to where it goes. And I think that's the concept that we explored with Stephen and Jamie. If you do that correctly and consistently, if you create a team that does that, that will start to feel very flowy, and flow states and ecstasis will begin to emerge in environments more frequently, as it did with us.
The key is, as you described, and as is described in Kotler's book when he recounts the story. You talk about it as a flock of birds. Is that you end up being able to do that alpha hopping without communicating with each other.
That's exactly right. Yeah, just like birds do, because you understand each other. So what does this take? It takes an enormous amount of trust. All right, so you have a trust in each other, in each other's attributes, which are the basics of SEAL training. The fact that this guy, I could meet a Navy SEAL on the street tomorrow, right? I'd never met before,
Okay.
but knowing that guy has been through SEAL training, been through BUDS, been through Hell Week, been through all that stuff, I immediately know something about that person, about that man, right? Because I know there's a certain amount that I know I can count on him for, because he's been through the same experience I have. So I know exactly what I'm going to expect in that vein. Well, that just builds as you work with guys over the years. And so when you get to very high level units and you've been working together for a long time, that
Mhm.
trust in competence and in attributes is just so strong that I mean, it's easy for you to shift and flow. It's easy for me as the guy in charge to say, oh, wait a second, right now I'm in support. you know,
Right. Okay.
I'm in support of my operators who are up there right now. And then as soon as they need me to be in charge, I'll be in charge again, right? It's so trust is the fundamental factor for dynamic subordination. And I think trust is the fundamental factor for flow states in teams and groups.
This is really powerful insight that in the business world, I think a lot a lot of organizations really need to figure out how to harness, because that model that you're describing, of high performing teams, that model needs to be adopted, because that is not the way
Right.
most organizations are running their teams.
Yeah.
And so I guess if you want to be the most competitive organization out there, then again, what we're going to talk about with these attributes, it's not just the attributes themselves, but the values that you talk about, like trust. We'll get more into that. I don't want to skip too far ahead, but it's amazing stuff. Um, One other thing, while you were with the SEALs, and it's described in Kotler's book, Stealing Fire, as well, about how you created the Mind Gym. He talks about taking a tour of the Mind Gym.
Yeah.
It's such an intriguing name for a whatever it was. I know what it was, but Can you talk a little about, for our audience, the Mind Gym, what you did at the Mind Gym, what it was?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so part of the charter I had when I took over the training job was to kind of examine human performance and human/operator performance and resilience. Okay, so how could we make ourselves and our operators better, faster, stronger? Part of that was to explore PTSD in terms of whatever form that took for the Navy SEAL in our cases, right? So because it takes different forms depending on the group you're looking at. Okay, Navy SEALs, in fact, PTSD for Navy SEALs shows up a little bit differently for other people, just because we're very good compartmentalizers and things like that. So you have to kind of understand if it's there. But the other thing that happens, regardless of whether it's a SEAL team in any kind of machismo kind of environments where you need to have some machismo in there in the mix, right? Is that any type of weakness or vulnerability is typically hidden, right? So you have to create a sense, and we wanted to create an environment that allowed guys to work on themselves, especially mentally, in a capacity that enhanced performance rather than was labeled something's wrong with me. Okay.
Okay.
Um, we felt like, and I say we because I was the lead at the time, but I had a group of a team who was working with me on this, and so what we felt was, hey, we're already really good in the gym. Okay, we're pretty good physically. We know exactly what we need to do: running, swimming, lifting weights. We know what that looks like. Each of us has our tolerances, and we know what we can do. So what's the next leap? Okay, the next leap is not benching 100 more pounds. The next leap is not running the mile a minute faster. The next leap has to be mental. Okay, so how do we begin to explore exercising our brain, like creating a relationship with our brain, so that we can better perform, so we can access our own physiology faster. We can take charge of the chemicals that run through us and course through us, both in stress states when our sympathetic system is firing off, and get ourselves to parasympathetic states so we can recover faster. How can we do that more effectively, more proactively? And really, so we just started throwing a bunch of things against the wall, and we started throwing things like HRV breathing. We had the float tanks. We had
Right.
we had mental acuity kind of exercises, and we brought in some mental conditioning coaches. And really, the idea was, let's just start creating an environment where guys can begin. They have a place they can begin to start exploring their own brains, and in doing so may also find areas that might need a little bit of repair, right? So if someone is going through a program and they're saying, okay, I'm training with this and there's something kind of not right in my head, then that individual now is volunteering to go get that taken care of with a psychologist or whatever, because it's in the vein of, I want to get better, versus I'm broken and something's wrong with me. And so that was really the impetus when Stephen was visiting. We were really kind of at the beginning stages. I've been out for 4 years, and we always say, when you get out of the Navy, especially the SEAL teams, it's like getting off of a roller coaster that's on fire, because you get off and suddenly it just goes away. And so
Right.
I still talk to friends of mine, but a lot of my friends are also out, so I don't have a lot of visibility on where they are now, but the idea was to kind of get into this mental version of performance versus just the physical.
So I want to just pick up on a thread there, uh, because so the flotation tanks,
Hmm.
those devices are from the 60s, and they were used in a film called Altered States. It was part
Hmm.
of the plot of a movie called Altered States. I don't know if you ever saw the movie.
I haven't, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, so in the movie, that a doctor is accessing. He's using the flotation tank. He's also doing psychedelic drugs to access our past, to
Hmm.
access, and he starts devolving into the primitive, as we go back and kind of see this process of evolution in reverse. And interestingly enough, especially interesting that you didn't see the film, in an interview you did, someone mentioned, or you mentioned that being in a flotation tank was like aging in reverse. So I don't know if that's something you said or not, but if it is, that what is that concept? What did you find the flotation tank helped with when it came to healing or rebuilding, or empowering the mind?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I said that, but I don't necessarily disagree with it. I think the
Okay.
flotation tank has effects, different effects on different people. There are some folks who get in that tank and just freak out. They do not like it whatsoever. And
Okay.
for your audience who might not know what a flotation tank, also called an isolation tank, an isopod, right? Isolation
Okay.
pod. The idea is, it's a pod. It's filled with water. It looks like a big, kind of like an eggshell coffin type thing. It's filled with water that has Epsom salt in it, and it's basically set to the salinity level of, say, the Dead Sea. So you get into this thing, and you literally can relax every muscle and float there on top of the water, to include your head. You have no weight. You're completely weightless. The water itself is at about 92, 93 degrees. So it literally feels, when you close this thing and it kind of, you're in this cocoon, it feels like you're floating in space.
Okay.
Some people get freaked out about that, but the idea behind the pod is it basically deprives as many senses as you can deprive, right? So they're trying to take away feeling, they're trying to take away smell, they're trying to take away sight. Ultimately, the initial use of those tanks was in the vein of recovery, okay? Because
Okay.
when we're talking about recovery, when we're talking about our body is going through stress events, okay, whether they be as stressful as combat or training, or be as stressful as a day in school, or a day with your kids, or a day at work, right? We are often consistently in a sympathetic response. Okay, when we're in a sympathetic response, our body is creating cortisol. Okay, cortisol is necessary for us to react, to respond. But the problem with cortisol is it also is damaging. I shouldn't say it's damaging, because it's a natural substance, but it creates a lot of wear and tear on our systems. Okay, so our human physiology was designed, and our nervous system was designed to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Okay, parasympathetic is when our body is in relax mode. Okay, our bodies begin to recover and relax, and our body shifts from making cortisol to making DHEA. DHEA is the fundamental building block of testosterone, estrogen, all this good stuff. It basically helps rebuild our systems. Okay, in physiological sense, it's basically repairing the wear and tear that the cortisol conducted on our bodies. Okay,
Right.
so when we are so the number one way our bodies do this, by the way, is sleep. Okay, when we go into deep sleep, when we go into normal sleep cycles, and normal means you're in stage 4 sleep. So you go 1, 2, 3 to, stage, you're hovering between stage 3 and 4 sleep, in REM sleep and otherwise. Our bodies are in full repair mode. Okay, our bodies are creating DHEA. Our brains are wrapping the neural networks that we learned that day with myelin. Our body's in recovery. That's what sleep does for us. Hard to tell someone who can't sleep to just sleep better. Okay, what the pod helped guys do was begin to put themselves in an environment where you're almost you're almost in a sleep state of recovery, in terms of
Okay.
your sensory deprivation. And there were a lot of guys who began using that, who weren't sleeping very well, who began using that on a weekly basis, 2 or 3 times a week, and they started sleeping really well, right? Because they were training their bodies to start recovering, training their bodies to kind of do this. So that's what it began as. There are the movies about there. There are lots of people who try to add the psychedelic type thing to it, to try to get into some cool, or how they would define as cool, altered states. We never did that. The military is not into that
Right.
type of use of external substances, nor should we. You got to be really careful with that stuff, because there's nothing precise about those types of
Right.
drugs. You just don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not an advocate, nor someone who detracts from it. I'm just, it's just something the military doesn't do. But the tanks themselves, I thought, and a lot of guys thought, were phenomenal, in the sense that you could really kind of get into this recovery state. And whether you stayed in there for 30 minutes or an hour, I had some friends who were in there for 2 or 3 hours.
Wow.
Um, and they'd come out and you'd feel refreshed, you'd feel recovered. And so you can also start to add in visualization in there. You can just kind of, you can meditate in there, you can do whatever. But it's a really fascinating experience. If you haven't tried float tank, they're now becoming more predominant around the nation. So I know, it's likely that wherever you live, you can probably look up isolation pod or float tank, and probably go somewhere where you could try it out, especially if you're kind of near a bigger city. But yeah, we thought it fascinating. We brought it in. It helped a lot of guys. It continues to help guys. And it's I think it's a powerful tool in especially the recovery mode.
Very, very interesting stuff. Thanks for enlightening there. So, okay, let's dig into the attributes, man.
Okay.
Um, so, because there's you got 25 of them, but I'm going to quote you from the book. You say ultimately we actually landed on a list of 36 attributes, and and it changed the game for us in terms of understanding our process and explaining the results. We could now articulate to ourselves and to candidates what we were looking for and why.
Yeah.
Now, however, Rich, you paired, those 36 down to 25 for the book. You say the 25 attributes in this book are the most common and the most applicable to the broadest spectrum of optimal performance.
Yes.
And you divide them into 5 categories: grit, mental acuity, drive, leadership, and team ability. So my question is, what happened to the 36? And was there another, and I'm just curious, was there another category, or did those extra attributes fall into those 5 groups?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both. So first thing that the audience needs to realize is that the list of attributes required for a Navy SEAL is going to be different than the list of attributes required for, say, a business person or an HR person or a team of nurses or a sports or an athletic team, right? So the list of attributes that is always going to be subjective. So that was one thing. I couldn't take the 36 attributes and say, okay, this is the list for everybody. So that's one thing. The other thing is that as I looked at it, because again, I hadn't looked at this, I had thought about it, but I actually pulled out my old list when I started thinking about the book, and I said, well, some of these actually are skills. They're more skills, which will often happen if anybody takes the time to start mapping out what attributes they think are required for their team. My advice is just to throw down anything they can think of, right? Whatever it is, right? Put it on a piece of paper or a flip chart or whatever medium you're using. But then once you do that, you need to go through that list, because it's going to be probably pretty assured that you're going to have some skills on there, because skills and attributes get conflated all the time, as it did with us. So things like, so when we did this as a command, we said things like great shot. That's a skill. That's a limited. Great PT or PT row. That's a skill, right?
Mm.
So I had to call out the skills. So some of the 36, I think, were, as I looked at them, were more skills focused.
Okay.
But then I said to myself, I never wanted to write a book for or about Navy SEALs. Okay, there's enough SEAL books out there. We can agree to that, and certainly you've had a bunch of guests who've been on there, and they're all great. I mean, I have nothing bad to say about any of them. But I wanted to write a book that made the reader the hero versus the SEAL or the neuroscientist or anything like that. So I wanted to say, okay. So I said, okay, what are the attributes that someone could read this and say, hey, these I can apply to overall optimal performance in any environment, right? So now you can apply these things to every day as much as you can apply to the SEAL, to the athlete, to the person who's struggling with cancer and chemotherapy. You can apply the same stuff, right? So the idea was to ubiquitize it and make it into some core ones. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but it's a great start for anybody who's diving into the concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just interesting, the 5 categories, the grit attributes, the mental acuity attributes, the drive attributes, the leadership attributes, the team ability attributes, which is an interesting word.
Yeah.
But the first 4 attributes that you cover
Yep.
are the grit attributes,
Yes.
which are courage, perseverance, adaptability, and resilience.
Yes.
So I'm going to quote you. In the SEAL environment, I deconstructed grit into 4 component attributes. No one can make it through BUDS without fairly high levels of all 4. But life also requires all 4. Everyone will face terrible challenges: a bad diagnosis, a layoff, an economic downturn, the death of a loved one, a global pandemic like COVID-19. And those with more grit will be better able to push through them. Yet, it's not only in crises that these attributes matter. How so?
Well, again, grit. Sometimes we need grit just to get through our day. Sometimes we need a little bit. Now, we might not need courage every day. Okay, but this is why I had to deconstruct grit, because grit. A lot of people, to include myself, thought and think grit is one thing. Grit is its own attribute. Okay, but what I realized was, no, it's actually a combination of things. It's a combination of things that makes up grit, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the same things every time. Okay, courage is certainly an aspect of grit in many cases, but you can have perseverance without courage. I mean, you don't need, again, courage. Courage cannot exist in the absence of fear, right? So if fear is not showing up, then courage is not there. Okay, which means you can persevere in situations where there is no fear. Okay, that is grit as well. You can adapt in situations where there is no fear, and maybe there's no perseverance, and that's grit too. That's really grit is about being able to move through, and in many cases take that small step forward, and keep going. And then resilience is in there because resilience has to be accounted for, because if you can't effectively be resilient, you're going to entropy over time. You are going to get weaker and weaker and weaker, and you're going to get you're not going to be able to grow from this stuff, right? So that's why resilience had to be thrown in. But yes, life. I mean, getting through the traffic jam might require some grit. Getting through the argument with a teenager might require some grit. Look, just our look at our frontline workers. For COVID,
Right.
they are executing grit every single day. The people with COVID are executing grit every single day. Our first responders, our firefighters, our police, everybody who's out there doing stuff in service to others, everybody who's just trying to get through their day every step of the way, is in some ways executing some levels of grit. And in my and I would purport that at least some levels of at least a few of these four attributes that make up grit.
Without question. And the courage attribute, I found very interesting a point that you make in the book about the courage circuit.
Yeah.
Can you explain the concept of the courage circuit and how the neurotransmitter dopamine plays an important role in making some of us courageous individuals?
Absolutely. So this is based on a lot of work that I did with a good friend of mine, Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's a neuroscientist and ophthalmologist at Stanford University, and he and I met a good 4 years ago, and we've been working on this idea of optimal performance. In fact, we bonded on this idea. We were actually at a conference where we were supposed to help design a peak performance type thing for executives, and that's where we met, and we kind of went off to the side and said, neither of us were really into peak performance. We were into optimal. And so we realized, that this is something we wanted to explore. And so he and I have talked about courage. He runs a lab where he scares people, and I talk about that in the book. Courage is a combination of two things, okay? And those two things are anxiety and uncertainty, okay? You can have those two things singularly. Let me back up. It's not courage. Fear is a result of two things. Okay. Anxiety and uncertainty. Okay. You can have those two things singularly, and you don't necessarily have fear. Okay. You can be anxious, but not uncertain, which means, okay, I am anxious about the presentation I have to give on Monday morning. I might be anxious about this date I'm going to go on, that I haven't, and I haven't been on a date for a while. Okay. That's anxious. That's anxiety without uncertainty. Okay. There's no fear there. It's just anxiousness. Okay.
Right.
You can have uncertainty without anxiety. Okay. That's every kid on Christmas Eve. Okay. Or if you're opening a birthday present, right? That's
Right.
uncertainty without anxiety. In fact, that's exciting. Okay. When you combine uncertainty and anxiety, that's when fear starts to show up. I'm both anxious and uncertain. Okay. When those two things exist, when fear begins to show up, there starts to be a physiological response. It's an autonomic response. We start to get into it comes from our amygdala, and we start to go into kind of this fight or flight. Okay, now we're not talking about tipping over into a fight or flight response without thinking, but our physiology begins to start heading that direction. That's the result of fear. It's an internal response. All right. Fight and flight are the two things we can decide in that moment. Our body can decide unconsciously if we're completely tipped into a full-blown amygdala autonomic response, or more likely we're afraid and we kind of have to decide what to do. There's also the freeze factor, which people talk about, but freeze is really neurologically, it's a flittering between fight and flight. It's kind of it's an oscillation between the two where you can't really decide which one to do.
Okay.
If you choose to either fight or flee, okay, and then fight means move into the courage. It doesn't mean necessarily put up your dukes and and beat someone up. All right, it's move into the fear. If you decide to do either one, a separate switch in the brain fires off. Okay, when you decide to fight, when you decide to step into your fear, there's a switch in the brain that clicks on. Okay, that's called the courage switch. Or at least certainly something Andrew Huberman talks about being the courage circuit. Okay, as soon as you do that, as soon as that switch flips in your brain,
Mhm.
you are rewarded with dopamine. The neurotransmitter dopamine is one of the most powerful chemicals on the planet. It's a neurotransmitter. Okay, it tells us that something is pleasurable. So it's not necessarily pleasurable, but it tells us, hey, that is pleasurable. That feels good. Okay. This is why the addictive substances, whether it be smoking or drugs or alcohol or even eating or gambling, are such dopamine heavy activities. But
Right.
it's not that those activities are giving us it's when we do those activities, it's releasing dopamine that's telling us, hey, this is good, keep doing it. That's why we keep doing it. Okay. Same thing happens when we step into fear. When we step into fear, we're given a dopamine hit, which means, hey, this is good, keep going. Now, this is design. This is by design. As humans, as we evolved, nature needed to provide human beings a way to explore and discover and keep moving forward and survive. Right. So it had to generate a reward system that allowed us to keep on going. Right. So I talk about a kind of a fictional group of explorers in prehistoric Earth, right? That are going to find new territory in which they can find food and drink and water. And our ancestors had to be courageous enough to step into the unknown. All right. When we step into the unknown, our body says, yes, this is good, keep going. This doesn't necessarily mean that we reached our objective. Okay. Reaching our objective actually is a whole nother thing, and it gives us dopamine, yes, but it's by design to help us keep taking steps. So every step we make into our fear gives us a dopamine hit, right? This is what courage is. The courage circuit is the act of us stepping into our fear, engaging that circuit, and getting that dopamine response. So what does this tell us? What it tells us a couple things. First, it tells us that courage cannot exist without fear being there first, right? If there is no fear, there is no courage. Okay. So fear has to exist. And the other thing that tells us is that we have to understand that courage, as you do it more and more, it actually can be somewhat addictive, right? This is why you see guys who are, I'll use the skydiver who turns into a base jumper, who turns into a wingsuiter, like constantly pushing the envelope, right? But again, this is evolutionary design. We were designed as humans to push the envelope. I mean, this is exactly what made us from cave dwellers to space explorers. We've been designed as a species to continue to press our boundaries and press our edges and walk to our edges. That takes courage, and that takes the courage circuit. And so courage as an attribute exists to the extent that some of us are wired in a way that allows us to do that a little bit more easily, and some of us are wired in ways that allows us to do that less easily. But the good news is, every one of us can develop it, can practice it, because the problem is it takes a deliberate launch into uncertainty and challenge and stress, right? But if you're willing to do that, this is why it grows. And again, growth comes from this is a meme that we've heard so many times that it might get sickening to hear, but it's repetitive because it's true. We grow through challenge. We grow through strife. I mean, look, we go to the gym to lift weights. When we lift a weight, we are literally ripping our muscles. Okay. And the growth comes when we're resting and our muscles are rebuilding and growing, but we have to rip our muscles to grow them. Right. Same goes in life. I mean, growth and evolution is a challenging process, and it takes challenge and strife. So,
it's so interesting that, as you mentioned that this comes, the courage circuit, that comes easier to some of us who take the leap into the unknown, and then get the dopamine hit, versus those that it's harder to do that. It's interesting that as humans, or maybe for those it's easier, they get a sense, somehow there's a sense that there is a dopamine hit coming if they do it, even when they haven't ever done it yet.
yeah.
But maybe for those that find it more challenging, or succumb to their fear, maybe they don't have that sense that there's a dopamine hit coming.
Right. But I would offer that anybody who's listening to this podcast, anybody who's listening to this podcast and knows anybody else, almost every human being on the planet has at one point stepped into fear.
Yes.
And felt how good that felt after successfully doing it. Okay. That good feeling, that's dopamine. All right. So we all can probably harken back to a time we've done it and felt how good it was to do it. The trick is, if you do want to develop it, you just need to do more consistently. And the caveat to that, because there always has to be one, is that uncertainty has to exist for fear to be there. So, for example, I talk about the book. I'm not a big fan of heights, right? So skydiving was always a challenge for me. Okay. But the more, so I had to step into my fear every time I jumped out of an airplane. But the more I jumped out of an airplane, the more used to jumping out of an airplane I got. So after a while, the fear was gone, right? The fear left me, okay? Which meant courage left me too, okay? Because I didn't need courage to jump out of the airplane anymore, okay? So to practice courage will take a consistency in stepping outside one's comfort zone, but then also changing contexts in terms of what they do. If you are someone who is afraid of or it makes you afraid to, or maybe you're afraid of heights, okay? Step into heights, but you're gonna have to step into different types of heights. And then maybe you might want to, if you want to practice, get used to heights. And well, now I'm not really good at public speaking. Okay, well now you're gonna have to go do public speaking. Do something else that induces that fear to continue. You have to practice courage. There must be fear, right?
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I like that because, you can practice in different ways, and, you start strengthening that circuit, allows you to push into, harder and harder challenges that you were probably more
Totally.
afraid.
Yeah, and that's by design. We're supposed to evolve.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. The next group of attributes are the mental acuity attributes:
Yeah.
situational awareness, compartmentalization, task switching,
Mm-hmm.
and learnability. So, all right. Let me quote you here. Most people believe that they can multitask. Most people, in fact, believe they're very good at it. In one famous study from the University of Utah, a statistically absurd but remarkably confident 70% of participants thought they were above average in their ability to do multiple things at once. They weren't, and you aren't either. So, what is task switching, and why is multitasking a myth? Because my wife swears that she's an incredible multitasker. And if you ask me, I would say, yeah, she can do it. I can't. But it's a myth. She's not. No one is.
Right.
What is?
Well, I do talk about the I think it was 2% of super taskers that actually they actually can get better at tasks as they move on. But here's the neurology of it, is that our brains can't consciously focus on anything more than one thing. There's some neurology, and I'm not going to get into it, that says maybe you can be aware of something else, but you can't. But I think that gets into some more deep neurology. Now, where this doesn't count, okay, where your wife is likely right, is for activities that we do unconsciously. So, for example, you and I can very effectively drive a car and listen to a podcast. Okay, that seems like multitasking, but it's really not, because we are doing. If we're listening to the podcast, the driving part is automatic. We're not thinking about our driving. So if we've been able to relegate tasks to unconscious competence, right? We can do it without thinking. It feels sometimes like we can multitask. But to give you an example, if I'm driving or driving, and if I'm listening to the Alpha Human podcast while I'm driving, and I'm listening to you talk to a guest, I'm like, man, this is awesome, right? And then suddenly someone cuts me off, okay? And I have to suddenly like turn the steering wheel, brake, or whatever. All right. It is inevitable that after that 10, 15, 20 seconds passes, I'm going to have to rewind the part I just missed on the podcast, right? Because my brain just switched from listening to the podcast to just addressing the threat. Okay. Task switching is just that. We do this all the time neurologically. Task switching is the ability to hop between tasks and contexts that aren't related. Sometimes this happens within one context. So, for example, driving a car. You're actually task switching inside of a context, right? One moment you're focusing on steering, and the next moment you might be focusing on the brake. Maybe the next one in the blinker. Some of it's also relegated to unconscious competence, right? So that happens too. But that's task switching inside a context. As soon as you park that car, though, and you walk out in the parking lot of the grocery store, now you're walking in the parking lot. You've just jumped contexts. Okay, now you're in parking lot context. Okay, now you're looking at cars coming. You're looking at people going in. Then you go into the grocery store, and you've just jumped context again. Now you're in grocery store context. Okay, our brain is making those neurological leaps every time. So this is task switching. Oftentimes we are forcing ourselves to task switch when we shouldn't be. Okay, our cellular phones, for example, are a collection of thousands of different contexts. Okay, Instagram, Facebook, the text stream, whatever it is. Okay, and so often you and I might be in the middle of a conversation, and if I allowed it, my phone is on the table and suddenly it bings, right? Well, my brain just hopped. Okay, that context, it's neurologically, it's like jumping from a library to a soccer field, right? My brain has to make that leap. So I've just forced my brain to task switch when it shouldn't have. All right. Task switching as an attribute comes with people who are more able to effectively hop between contexts, and still maintain their focus on what they need to focus on. So for example, if someone, perfect example is my younger son. My younger son, he's a really deep thinker, and so when he gets into something, he's very deep focused. I can call his name 5 times and he won't hear me, and it's not because he's not listening. It's not because he actually is just not, he doesn't want to answer me. It's because focused, it's hard for him to hop out, right? So some people who are, if you find yourself as someone who, when you dive into something, when you start a task, if you get knocked out of that task, it's hard for you to focus in on what you just get knocked to, and then hard for you to focus out. You may be a little bit less on task switching. If you're someone who hops contexts very easily, then you may be actually pretty good at task switching. Although the far right of that would be someone who task switch too much, right? So some people who have ADHD, for example, tip to too much task switching, so that they're hopping so fast, it's too fast, right? They're never able to focus on anything, right? So there's a happy medium. And again, no one number or no one position is necessary. It depends on what you want for your life. My buddy Andrew Huberman is a self-admitted someone who he dives deep, and it's hard for him to hop out. Well, guess what? That is a perfect attribute or level of the attribute to have when you're a scientist studying data, right? You need to be able to dive in. You need to be able to kind of focus in on stuff and not have distractions, right? For a Navy SEAL, not so much. I need to be able to focus in, but I also need to be aware of my surroundings. So I need to be able to hop out. So having more or less is not necessarily a good or bad thing, right?
And I think the point of all of this, by the way, we should probably state, is that as we're going through some of these attributes, the point isn't whether or not you have them or you don't. You talk about how we all have them to a varying degree.
That's right.
The key here is that just identifying what these attributes are allows one to better maybe understand what their top attributes are, and then perhaps make a match with the type of things that they'll be great at or the roles that they could be doing. And for those that are looking to build teams, hey, it's not just the skills, far from it. These are of the 25, I need these 8 attributes.
That's exactly right.
That's the key, I think.
That's the key.
Right?
We all show up with a certain palette of attributes. And so it's up to us. Okay, how do I show up? How can that best fit what I'm doing? And if you are interested in developing certain ones, just know that if you're a little bit lower on the scale, you can develop an attribute. You can't do it the same way you learn a skill. Okay, I can't sit down and teach you patience. Okay, I can't teach a class on how to be more patient. You have to decide. Say, okay, I'm deciding I want to be more patient. I'm deciding I want to be more empathetic. I'm deciding I want to be more adaptable, right? And then it takes self-direction, and it takes one's willingness to throw themselves into situations that test that and allow them to proactively develop it.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so mental acuity, you talk about the most important of the mental acuity attributes is learnability.
Yeah.
So what does learnability mean? Because look, we all have the capacity to learn.
Yeah.
Some might be better at learning languages, some might be better at learning music, et cetera, et cetera. But learnability as an attribute, how do you define it? And why is it the most important of the mental acuity traits?
Yeah, well, and I'll take it one step further. We all do learn. I mean, if we're not learning creatures, we are not effective in the world, right? So we all do learn. Learnability is your ability to process, absorb, and apply those things, those lessons of your environment effectively in your current state, right? Some of us are faster than others, and admittedly, learnability is probably my lowest one on all 3. I mean, it takes me. So what does that mean? It takes me a while to pick things up. We all know people and they're people who they try something once and they got it right. It's just like
Right.
you tell them something once and they got it right. These people are high on the learnability scale. They are able to process this information, absorb it, and then use it very rapidly, right? Some of us aren't that fast, right? It takes me a little while. It takes me repetition. Okay.
Same here.
Again, nothing wrong with it. You just have to understand that about ourselves, right? So I know when I'm going to learn something, I know, hey, I'm gonna need a little bit more time to repeat, to absorb, to try to get that, to embody it in my system. I might make the same mistake a couple times before I actually learn. Whereas some people high on learnability, they never make the same mistake twice, right? They just don't. They're just high on that attribute. It is the most important because if you don't have it, nothing else really matters.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that ability to process that quickly and learn it and apply it. Again, it's amazing when I love when I hear, and I think you talk about being vulnerable enough to not be, uh, you know, to present yourself as a superhero, someone who's untouchable. Because I love hearing about someone who's accomplished as much as you've accomplished, still sitting there saying, I'm horrible at learnability, because we're like, what? How's that possible? He's written this book, The 25 Attributes. But again, this makes it all empowering for people who think that they're average to realize that actually you could do superhuman things.
Yes.
Um,
And
the
I would say
drive
this:
attributes.
we are all average. It's just our ability to apply ourselves and what we bring to the table to make us above average, right? But we all start out the same, so we just have to work on how to apply it.
Amazing. Um, okay, the drive attributes: uh, self-efficacy,
Yeah,
discipline, open-mindedness, cunning, and narcissism. I love those last two.
yeah,
Um, but what's interesting is that none of those explain what drive is. Um,
not really. No.
right? Like if you told me, okay, you have self-efficacy, discipline, open-minded, cunning, and narcissism. What do you have? Be like, you'd be like, I don't know. Okay, so how do you define drive?
Yeah, well, drive is really a verb, isn't it? I mean, it's what we do. It's kind of it's this ability to move towards a long-term goal overall, right? But not just a long-term goal, but to be able to, I think, imagine and then create and then achieve. I mean, I think human beings are human beings because we all have at least elements of drive. We all have this ability to imagine that which does not exist and bring it into existence. And I think those folks with high levels of these attributes tend to do that more effectively than other folks. So I look at people, and again, this is a little bit different than grit. Grit is really more about
Yeah.
the short term, right? But
Okay.
but drive is about the really long term. So you look at very highly successful people, and it's pretty obvious that very highly successful people have a lot of a combination, or at least a good combination of these attributes.
Wow. So we talk about what's really fascinating in the book. You talk about the source of that drive,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause, yeah, okay, you've got the attributes, um, but like, what's the source of bringing it to the fore?
Yeah.
And you say in the book, I'll quote you here: things like money, reward, and punishment hold little value when compared to what Daniel H. Pink, author of Drive, uh, labels as the three elements of true motivation, which are autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Yeah.
Now, it appears that okay, so that's your quote from the book. It appears to me that initially, when we as humans set out into the world, before we truly understand ourselves, before we kind of get who we are as individuals, that we are all initially driven by the first three things that
Yeah.
are mentioned there, right? Money, reward, and punishment. And for many, by the way, I don't think that ever changes. But for most, the money, reward, punishment formula does lose their significance.
Hmm.
Uh, Yet I think the few that seem to be able to access that deeper level of drive that you mentioned there, those few very, very, the 1% of the most successful people, have discovered, maybe I shouldn't say the 1%, but those that are successful, they seem to have discovered what their purpose in life is.
Yeah.
Is that is this level of awareness, understanding who you are and what your purpose is, essential to leveraging the drive attributes?
I would say yes and no. I mean, again, what Daniel Pink doesn't, what he makes sure he doesn't say, is that money and success and things like that aren't drivers, because they are, right. And I would actually say that that your our environment
Uh-huh.
probably has a lot to do with how much you have the extrinsic versus intrinsic driving factors. But listen, I mean, someone who's growing up in poverty
Right.
is going to be motivated by money, right? They are, because they're like, I want to do better. There's nothing wrong with that. I would actually, I guess I would hypothesize that that some of these folks who have achieved this massive success financially or whatever or otherwise
Mhm.
have now the ability to reframe their driving factors in a more maybe altruistic
Okay.
or even uh, just humanistic kind of thing. But let's just think of most of us who just live kind of normal lives. Okay,
Okay.
because of the society we're in, because of the time frame in civilization that we're in, we are
Mhm.
all in a place where we don't have to hunt for our own food. We don't have to worry about getting killed when we walk out the door by other tribes, as long as say we're in the U.S. or any maybe kind of more civilized country. But we don't have to worry about some of those very survival things that the early humans, or even some humans right now, have to worry about, right?
Mhm.
And therefore, we get to think about goals that are beyond ourselves. Think about goals that are
Right.
beyond food, water, shelter. Okay,
Okay.
and I would offer that yes, in terms of those goals that are beyond food, water, shelter, these drive attributes are very effective in allowing us to kind of pursue and achieve those, because
Okay.
they are kind of crucial in that pursuit. If we don't have, and I talk about it, you need probably at least two or more of these attributes to effectively be driven. Because if you only have just one, it's quite inert, or in kind of the case of narcissism, dangerous. So
Right.
yeah, so you have to. So I think all those get taken into account.
Okay. Yes. You know, fair enough. That completely makes sense. Um, and then, so if you're going for those extrinsic goals, and you are able to leverage, I think most people are able to leverage at least two of those attributes that you've mentioned. But one of them, very interesting, what you talk about, discipline.
Yeah.
Discipline as an attribute, because you make a powerful distinction, and that is the difference between self-discipline and discipline. So, like in Jocko Willink's book, Discipline Equals
Mm.
Freedom,
Yeah.
we get the sense of how, another Navy SEAL, right?
Yes.
We get the sense of how powerful a force discipline can be in our life, but Jocko's mostly referring to the power of self-discipline. And after reading your book, and particularly the chapter, The Self Disciplined Loser, great title for that chapter, The Self Disciplined Loser, I gained a whole new perspective on the concept of discipline and how
Yeah.
it differs from self discipline. So, a quote from you is, self discipline can keep you focused on and even help you achieve external goals, but it's not required. And sometimes it's not even relevant.
Right.
So this is very interesting. Can you explain the difference between discipline and self-discipline, and why it is discipline that is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a fun chapter for me to write, and I've thought even more upon it even after writing it.
Okay.
Because it's just a cool concept. Here's how I break it down in the most simplistic way: is that self-discipline are those things that you can affect and control, that the external world has no say in. Okay, so for example, you or me can decide to lose 10 pounds and be able to bench 300 pounds and run the mile in 6 minutes. Okay, and we're going to say we're going to do that. We're going to give ourselves the next 3 months to do that. Okay,
Okay.
nothing about the external world is going to affect our ability to do that. It's all self-discipline. Okay.
Okay.
Certainly, we could say, well, I was traveling, right? But that's not the external world. You can decide when you're traveling to go still train. You can decide when you're at the buffet line to have the healthy meal, right? That is self-discipline. Self-discipline are those things that you can control and you can be disciplined about that the external world has no say in. All right.
Got it.
Discipline overall, the discipline I talk about is the discipline of achieving those long-term goals that the external world has a say in. Okay, becoming a Navy SEAL, becoming a rock star, having a successful podcast. Okay, all these things are things that the external world has a say in, which
Mm,
means you need to be disciplined in the sense that you need to understand the wickets involved in getting to that goal. You need to understand that there's adaptability involved, and because nothing is going to go the way you planned it, right? The plan is going to go out the window, which means you're going to have to adjust. Okay, the when I talk about the self-disciplined loser, I talk about, again, let me just make sure I say being self-disciplined is not a bad thing. Okay, in
right.
fact, if you're self-disciplined and disciplined, you are a rock star. I think this is why Jocko is so successful. He is a rock star because he's both self-disciplined and disciplined. He combines the two very effectively. However, someone who is extraordinarily self-disciplined often is that way because they like certainty. Okay, because self-discipline implies and requires certainty. I know exactly. So just take the very easy physical example. Okay, I can be a physical Adonis because I know exactly what meals I need to eat at what times. I know when I'm going to eat it, how much I'm going to eat it. I know when I'm going to work out, and I have a schedule and a routine that allows me to do that. Those people often have trouble when the plan doesn't go the way they want the plan to go. Okay.
That's right.
Well, long-term goals, the plan's never going to go the way you want to go. So this is where self-discipline can become a hindrance to overall discipline, because overall discipline requires that you not get crushed by the lows during a climb, and you not get seduced by the highs, right? So even those small wins, you have to say, okay, great, got the win, but I know where I'm going still. Okay, there's still work to be done. The perfect example of this would be, we can learn a lot from rock climbers. Okay,
Okay.
the rock climber who wants to get to the top of that cliff face. Okay, yes, the top of the cliff face is the goal, but as that rock climber starts the ascent, okay, that rock climber is constantly looking for the right footholds, right? Well, sometimes the right foothold is going to be down and over to the side, right? It's not always in the direction of the goal, right?
Right.
And so discipline means, hey, I understand that I'm gonna have to go on a path. The path might look like sometimes it's taking me away from the goal, but I know that the path is actually, I'm doing that to actually ultimately get to the long-term goal. So this is the difference between long-term kind of discipline overarching and then self-discipline. So, although I will say this, those who feel like they don't have any of it can practice
Okay.
with self-discipline. Okay, self-discipline is a great way to practice, because
Gotcha.
it's a great first step, because the external world has no say in it. All right, so if those want to, so people can practice with self-discipline, just know that self-discipline is different than overall discipline.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. No, that's brilliant. And this is it really is amazing the level, because I haven't even gotten into and nor do we have the time. That's why people have to get your book, because you break down in the book. There are numerous attributes within the groups that you break down, like perseverance. You break down into like three other.
Yeah, it's dense. I will say it's dense.
It's yeah. So I mean, it's really cool the thought that you have put into each one of these attributes. Um, it has not been just a casual thing. You've really dug deep into each one of these and fully teased out what's going on. Wanted to ask about this interesting perspective you have on leadership, because you say that other people decide
Right.
whether you're right. You say that because most a lot of leaders are self-appointed. I started a company. I'm the leader.
Right.
I'm going to hire you. I'm your leader, right? People volunteer to be the leader. Other people decide whether you're a leader and whether they will follow, is what you say. Can you
Right.
elaborate on that concept?
Yeah, and it's really ultimately it's the difference between being in charge and being a leader. Yes, you are in charge of your company. Okay, whether or not you are the leader is based on whether or not someone else decides that they look at you as a leader. Okay, and this is where the military you learn this in the military. As a military officer, I was commissioned as an officer. I spent my entire career as an officer in the Navy. I was always in charge of something, but that's all it was. It was the people who were in my span of care who decided whether or not I was the leader, right? If they looked at me as a leader, and that's based on behaviors. And so the leadership list was interesting for me because I've now been in the leadership world since retiring. And one of the things that we did with the Chapman Co company as we taught these classes and gave these talks was we usually had a poll, and we'd ask the audience, okay, what do great leaders do? And we just make a list of everything that they said, and it'd usually be a list of like 20 or 30 things. And it was a mix between behaviors and attributes. To be honest with you, it was things like listening. Someone always say that great leaders listen. Well, listening is a behavior. It's a behavior, but it's also a skill. I can teach you how to listen better. I mean, I can teach you how to empathetically listen better. But a lot of them were attributes. Accountability, you can't necessarily teach accountability. You can't necessarily teach empathy. And so
Right.
so the leadership attributes comes with a caveat that says, okay, first of all, whether or not you are a leader is decided by others. Okay. However, if you are interested in being deemed a leader by other people and want to behave in a way that allows you to happen, these are some of the attributes that you should think about. Because in my experience, as I've looked at this, leaders with these attributes, or leaders who have been designated leaders, pretty much have a lot of these attributes, which is why that list became the way it is.
So decisiveness is a valuable attribute. Um, uh, Being decisive illuminates other attributes, right?
Yeah.
Courage, discipline, awareness that reinforce confidence. So, this is something you point out in the book. But what is the distinction between decisiveness and decision making? Because being a good decision maker can actually be better than being decisive, especially if your decisions lead to poor outcomes, right?
Kind of. I would say that the difference in being a good decision maker and decisiveness is speed and efficiency.
Okay.
Because as I've really experienced and as I've kind of talked to people who think about and consider others leaders, great leaders, the person in charge who makes long, protracted decisions or waffles between
Right.
decisions isn't really people don't have a lot of faith and confidence in that person, right?
Very true.
But when you're decisive, so it means a couple things. First of all, efficiency. That means that you are able to effectively look at the information, the incoming information, to the extent that you need to. Okay, this is the 80-20 rule. You're never going to get all of it, so look at as much as you can and that is relevant. So you're not going too little. You're not making a reckless decision, but you're also not taking too much time and trying to figure out information that may not exist or may come for a while. So there's an efficiency in information collection, but then there's the courage to actually make the decision. And decisiveness and making a decision means that it's final but not permanent. Okay, so when I make a decision, it's final.
Right.
This is what we're doing. This is the
Okay.
direction we're heading. But I'm also accountable, and I'm also open-minded, and I'm also humble enough to understand that the direction we just decided to go may be the wrong direction. So as we're assessing, as we move down that decision, that pathway, we're constantly assessing, and I'm willing to say at any moment, hey, wait a second, that was wrong.
Gotcha.
We need to change, right? People tend to have way more confidence and faith in leaders that actually do that versus leaders that take too long to even do anything, right? Because doing nothing is probably the worst thing to do. Now, we also don't want to conflate doing nothing or doing nothing with not making it. It's really not making a decision. People don't make a decision because the decision might be to do nothing. Okay, but that's still a decision,
Right.
right? So as long as you're making a decision and you're moving out on it, and then you are taking accountability, you're adaptable, you're open-minded, and you're saying, okay, that decision was final but not permanent, and I'm going to adjust if I need to, or we're just going to move down and be successful. Those are the types of people people really have a lot of confidence as leaders.
See, that's really important. And so for me, being devil's advocate and pushing on the fact that, hey, isn't it better to be a good decision maker as opposed to being decisive? the truth is, that's what you just said is absolutely key. If you're going to be a leader, if you don't have the ability to be decisive,
Yeah,
but then of course you back it up with those other pieces that you've just mentioned,
that's right.
you got to
That's
have
right.
that, you've got to be open-minded enough and adaptable enough. And, you have to have the humility, enough to say, wait a second, this is, we need to change course here.
Yeah.
So,
And oh, by the way, decision making itself is a skill. It can be taught. You and I can go to a class on how to make better decisions, right?
that's right.
So you have to figure out what the decisiveness, however, is an attribute.
See, there you go. See, that's the key. You're right, because I'm thinking decision maker as an attribute. It's not. It's a skill. And you mentioned that earlier in the interview, and in the book you talk about, assess yourself, come up with your attributes, list them. You're going to find a lot of them that you think are attributes or skills.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Because you're right. If you figure out the attributes, the beauty is you can teach the skills.
Totally.
You
Totally.
can't teach
Yeah.
the attributes. I love it. Okay.
Especially if you're high on learnability. You can learn any skill you want.
There you go. All right. The teamability attributes.
Yes.
The final category here. What's interesting about the 4 teamability attributes, integrity, conscientiousness, humility, and humor, is that they all inform behaviors that encourage trust. The most important factor in assessing whether someone is a good teammate or a good leader, the one underlying the others, but often unspoken. This is you, by the way, I'm quoting you here.
Mm-hmm.
The most important factor in assessing whether someone is a good teammate or a good leader, the one underlying the others, but often unspoken and unexamined, is trust.
Yes.
When teams fail, you say, that is, when they are unable to remain together as a team, it is almost always because of a lack of trust on some level.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain this? Because trust, this value, you call it a value in the book, trust continues to appear again and again to be a key in a lot of areas, but certainly both to great leadership and to being a great teammate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll take it one step further. I think trust is, so we often think of trust as a feeling. I feel like I trust this person. I feel like I trust
Right.
this thing. But a feeling, by definition, is simply a human emotion, right? So we know it has to be more than that. And so when we examined this, when I was with the Chapman Co Institute, we said, well, you know what? Trust is actually a belief. A belief is a feeling, is a human emotion that's been rationalized or justified by that human being. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It just matters that it has, right? And so trust becomes a belief. So what does that tell us? That tells us that you can't make anybody trust you. Okay, you just can't. It's impossible. Free will prevents that. Okay, all you can do is behave in a way that allows someone to make the decision to trust you, to form a belief of trust about you. Okay, so trust becomes incumbent on behavior, right? The only way that I can allow you, the only way I can get you to trust me is to behave in a way that allows you to make a decision to trust me, right? So if that's the case, then it becomes about behaviors, just like leadership is about behaviors, all right? So these attributes basically are attributes that express behaviors that lead to trust. That lead to someone making a decision. So if we have these attributes, if we're higher on these attributes, it's likely that we're going to behave in a way that allows people to trust us.
I see. So maybe I got it wrong. Is trust, so trust is a belief. Is it trustworthiness that's a value?
Trustworthiness, yes. I would actually say that, yeah, trustworthiness is a value.
Okay.
Yeah, I value it's something. Yeah, I would agree with that.
And then you become trustworthy if you have these particular attributes that enable you to behave in a certain way.
Yes, and again, decided by others, right?
Decided by others.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I don't get to say I'm trustworthy, right?
Okay.
Only someone else can say that about me. So yeah.
So you know what? This is going to cause me to jump back just for. And by the way, you've been very kind with your time. I've just got a couple more questions for you.
Oh, of course, this is fun. Of course.
So, all right. So speaking about that, I'm going to jump back to leadership for a moment, because among all of the leadership attributes, authenticity is the most important for building trust.
Yes.
Authenticity, by definition, can't be faked. You say
That's right.
it can't be copied. So how does someone become authentic?
Well, I mean, I think someone has to be authentic, right? Is that, authenticity is just, are you who you are? I mean, are you the same
But,
person
but what
with
if who you
everybody?
are? But what if who you are isn't, you know, isn't up to snuff? What if who you are isn't right for the role? What if who you are is not even who you want to be?
Well, so if who you are isn't who you want to be, that's one thing. Then that's your job to decide what that is. However, I would say it's a tough, I think, it's a tough judgment to say, not if who you are isn't up to snuff. I mean,
Okay.
we know this. Just think about the people in our lives who we trust implicitly.
Okay.
Okay. If we think about such, okay, just take one person. Just picture. I would encourage your audience to do this. Picture someone in your mind right now that you trust implicitly. Okay.
Yep.
That person is authentic. Okay. That person has good and bad. All right. That person comes in different sizes, flavors, whatever. That person has good days and bad days. And we trust them because they are who they are no matter what. So we trust them. They are who they are in their good days, their bad days. And so it goes for leaders. And as a leader, and what I say as I make the distinction, it doesn't mean you have to be nice. I tell a story in the book about a commanding officer that I met right at the change of command ceremony.
Yes, you
This
do.
guy, yeah, this guy, I met him, and I mean, shook his hand. It was a cold, kind of mean, grumpy handshake, and within 10 seconds, he was grilling me on some gear that had been sitting on the shelves, and I was giving him some kind of canned answers that some other guys had given me, and he wasn't buying. He was grumpy, and he was kind of like, he was mad and all that. And I walked away from that 2-minute conversation, being like, oh my god, this is going to be an awful 2 years, until I realized, a few weeks later, that this guy was like that with everybody. He was like that with enlisted people. He was like that with officers. He was like that with senior officers. He was like that whether he was at the chow hall in his office or at PT. He was always the same, which meant I could trust him. I trusted his authentic grumpiness. I trusted his authentic asking the tough questions,
Interesting.
and I knew exactly what to expect. And he turned out to be a phenomenal leader, and I consider him a leader to this day. And he made me a better officer because of it. And he was always grumpy,
Ah,
So it doesn't mean you have to be nice. It's really, authenticity is one of those things that is really easy to see from others, by others, because other people can see if you are the same person. And I would say, as if we're trying to examine ourselves,
right.
if we are a different person, if we are true, I mean, there's certain little caveats here, but if we are ostensibly a different person at work than we are at home, in
Yes.
one of those places we're lying. Okay. And so we have to figure out which one is which, because whatever that authentic person is, that's what's going to embody someone to then consider, oh, actually, I trust this person. And it doesn't have to be roses and unicorns, right?
You know what? That is so well said, because the reality is you don't have to like someone to trust them.
That's right.
And I can only imagine, how interesting it must be doing what you were doing, selecting for things like authenticity.
Yeah.
Um, and to be able to, I mean, again, it cannot be easy by any stretch to uncover some of these attributes, to
Yeah.
have to figure out who really is authentic, and just powerful stuff. Um, okay, a high performing team is defined. This is you again. Quote: A high performing team is defined less by how often it wins than by how well it loses.
Yeah.
Okay, explain that.
Yeah, well, this is dynamic subordination. Okay, this is the idea that our teams, and this is attributes. Okay, it's very easy to be a high performing team and to be the best, and everybody be happy and cool when things are going well. Okay, so if you're winning all the time and everything's going well, that's easy. It's easy to be happy. It's easy to be nice. It's easy to be kind. It's easy to have people's back when they're doing, everybody's doing the great work and everything's happening the way it's supposed to be happening.
Right.
It's when things go south and sideways that the true nature of our attributes really shows up, and the true nature of our relationships on team show up. Okay, because if the team is not set up from the construct of attributes, with the attributes we're looking for that team will dissolve in stress, challenge, and uncertainty. It will become a mess. It will become toxic. You'll get infighting.
Mhm.
People will start blaming each other, and performance will grind to a halt. And if not derail altogether, right? But those teams that you can see, I mean, we see it all the time. Those teams that just bad stuff happens and they just power through, and you almost see them become stronger and they become more bonded when things go wrong, right? Just think of our lives if we have great marriages. I mean, in great marriages are by definition ups and downs, and
Right.
and you go through hard times with your spouse. And I think any couple that's been married for a long time will say, "Hey, we stayed together because we were there for each other in the hard times." It wasn't because we were there together when everything was awesome. That
Right.
helped. It helps because you can't have all downs, right? Or you can't have all highs. But you have to recognize that great teams are great teams because they're great all the time, not just when things are going well. Because it's easy to be great when things are going well and everything's easy and everything's certain. And skills are all that's needed. It's only when attributes show up do you see if teams are really great.
Powerful stuff. All right. So, last question to put a cap on all of this. You did mention it earlier, but I want to kind of, diamond cut this with this last piece here about developing the attributes,
Yeah.
because in the book you say that attributes can be tweaked, they can be developed, and that you have a way to
Hmm.
develop. You can't learn attributes because these are something you're born with. It's just a matter of where on that line you fall. But the good news is you can develop them. So you talk about 5 steps to developing your attributes. And again, I know you touched on it earlier, but if we could explain for the audience so that they can now take away from this podcast actionable stuff, and tweak, develop, and evolve their attributes with the acronym START.
Hmm.
That's your method, START. So what does START stand for? How do you develop your attributes?
Yeah. So the quick kind of back of the envelope version is start, right? It's first a stop. Okay. Anytime you're developing your attributes, it's going to mean that you're in discomfort and stress and challenge. Okay, because that's how you have to be. Okay. So the
Okay.
first thing you have to do is stop. Okay. In other words, stop and then immediately go to the second one, T, which is think. Okay. Now you're saying, okay, what what do I want to develop here? Okay, so let's just take adaptability. Say you're in a situation where the environment is changing rapidly around you and you're feeling very stressed because of it because you're not high on adaptability. Okay, first stop. All right, I got it. I need the adaptability is something I need. Okay, now you think. Okay, adaptability is something I want to develop. I want to proactively do this. I need to make a conscious effort to be adaptable because my unconsciousness wants to take me into not being very adaptable. Right, so that's the think part. A is assess. You have to assess your environment. Right. I think I'm getting these right. It's been so. Let me know if I'm getting these wrong.
No, you're on the money.
Yeah, I assess the situation. So in this situation, how can I adapt? It usually comes with asking some questions.
Mhm.
Um, Respond or react. Okay, do it. Okay, so now you're going to adapt. You're going to proactively adapt.
Okay.
And then the last T. You got to remind me what the last T is
Try.
because
Try.
oh yeah. Sorry, so you want to try again. You want to try a new environment. So this is kind
Right.
of what we talked about. So you can practice being adaptable in one environment, but if you're constantly going to the same well in terms of environment, then adaptability will become more of a rote kind of, hey, it's not going to become a challenge anymore because you'll know exactly what to do. So try means try a new environment. So that's the kind of the back of the envelope. Here's how to do it. One of the things I've done since writing the book, because I realized I was getting a lot of questions and I hadn't thought deeply enough about it, is I've created workbooks that will be available on the website that
Really.
go that break down each attribute and how to develop that specific attribute. And the reason why
Very
I did that is because it's a very subjective task. My adaptability is going to be different than your adaptability, or my resilience is going to be different than your resiliency. So it's very subjective. So the workbooks are designed to help someone take a look at the attribute, ask some very specific questions about themselves, and then develop that attribute for themselves. So that'll be offered on the website as well, so people can dive deeper into whatever the attribute they want to develop is.
I think that the whole stop and think and assessment piece, you know, that right there. I mean, no one. I mean, no one does. Most people don't do that
Right.
intuitively,
Right.
because they're just stumbling through it all, and it just becomes overwhelming. But this idea of trying a new environment, kind of wading into another, wading into uncertainty as
Yeah.
it. So it almost seems like we're building a muscle by continually going into a new environment, and kind of adding a new context to apply that attribute towards.
Yeah. Yeah,
Is
and you
that
become good, and you become really good at that process. This is what I realized as a Navy SEAL, and really I could bin and pretty much all special operators into this category. Is I call us masters of uncertainty, and it's because we, through our training, through our experience, through everything we do, we become very, very good at that navigation process. It's not that we're good at any particular thing. What
okay?
makes spec operators so good at what they do is they become very good at dropping into uncertainty and immediately being able to navigate it through it, right? And they do this now often. You can become unconsciously competent in it, which means when I started to think about it, I said, okay, what actually do I do? And this is where I began to break this down into the START acronym, and then subsequently into these attribute development things. But what are those processes that we actually use to actually navigate uncertainty? Because that's what we get so good at. That's the real superpower of spec operators, and any other professions that actually require that level of performance.
I'll tell you what, so much of this is powerful insight after insight after insight. I got to tell you, thank you so much for spending time with us today, Rich. Where can our audience learn more about you, about what you're up to, the book, all the good stuff?
Absolutely. Well, if you go to theattributes.com, that's the website, you'll be able to find the book. You at least right now, if you get there, and this is before it's on sale, then you can pre-order it and you can get the first chapter.
Okay.
We're also doing a live launch event on the 27th of January. So the day after release, I'm going to do a launch event with my buddy Andrew Huberman. So it'll be him and I live talking about the book. So you can go there, you can order the book. We also have the assessment tool. So we've built an assessment tool for mental acuity, for grit, mental acuity, and the drive one. We're just trying to finish up now. But you can basically take this assessment and see where you stand on each of
Oh,
these
that's
attributes.
great.
Right. And so now this is a snapshot. It's not going to be, it's going to basically be where you compare to 1,000 other people that we've gotten data from around the world. Right. So
Okay.
you may, out of 1,000 people, you might be level 6 on adaptability, for example. So it's a snapshot to let you know where you stand. And then it's going to take some self-reflection to see and codify actually where you do. So you can do that on the website. And then, of course, I'll have the workbooks on the website. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. And Facebook as well. You can get to those links through the website as well. So all those places.
Great. So, and I love it. I love that you have that you're going to have these assessments. When will they be available?
They're available now, so you can go to the website now and at least do the grit and mental acuity. I'm not sure by the time this gets out there, we may have the drive up there. We're working on the drive right now, but yeah.
Great stuff. Rich, absolute pleasure. First and foremost, thank you so much for your service. And, it's been an honor having you on the Alpha Human podcast. I wish you a very happy and healthy and successful 2021.
As I do you, my friend. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Take care.
All right, you too.